The fluorescent lights in the VA hospital waiting room hummed like 1,000 angry wasps, a sound Marcus Webb had learned to hate over the past 3 years. He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair with his left leg stretched out stiff and uncooperative, the titanium rod running through his femur, sending sharp reminders up his spine with every small movement. Around him, other veterans waited in their own private circles of silence. Some were missing limbs you could see. Others were missing pieces you couldn't. Marcus belonged to both categories. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. 34 years old, but the mirror showed him someone ancient. The limp wasn't even the worst part. That, at least, he could explain to strangers who asked. It was everything else that hollowed him out. The nightmares that ripped him from sleep at 3 a.m, his throat raw from screaming, the way his hands shook when helicopters passed overhead, his body remembering before his mind could stop it, the crushing weight that pressed down on his chest in crowded places, turning a simple trip to the grocery store into a gauntlet of panic and shame. The doctors had a name for it: post-traumatic stress disorder. 4 words that were supposed to contain the fragments of who he used to be, the pieces scattered across a dusty road outside Kandahar when the IED detonated beneath his convoy. Marcus had a different name for it: punishment. Because 6 of his brothers hadn't come home at all, and he couldn't figure out why he'd been the one who survived. His phone buzzed against his thigh, vibrating through the worn denim of his jeans. A text from his sister Angela lit up the screen with that particular brand of cheerful persistence she'd perfected over the past 8 months. "Did you see that listing I sent? Just look at it, please." Marcus sighed, the kind of deep exhale that carried the weight of 1,000 similar conversations. Angela meant well. She always meant well, but her well-meaning couldn't fix the fundamental problem, which was that Marcus didn't know how to exist in a world that moved forward while he stayed frozen in that moment, trapped in the blast radius forever. He opened the link anyway, mostly to avoid another disappointed text about how he never listened, how he was shutting everyone out, how he needed to try. The auction site loaded slowly on the hospital's terrible Wi-Fi, revealing a photograph that stopped his aimless scrolling. A fortress. An actual honest-to-God fortress rising from red desert sand like something conjured from another century. Massive stone walls weathered to the colors of sunset. Towers still standing at each corner despite what had to be decades of neglect, maybe longer. The structure dominated the landscape around it, defiant and alone against an impossibly blue sky. The heading read, "Historic Military Fort, New Mexico, as is, minimum bid $12,000. Marcus stared at the screen. Then he scrolled through more photos. The place was enormous. Walls that had to be 20 feet high, maybe more. A courtyard large enough to park half a battalion's worth of vehicles. Buildings arranged along the interior perimeter, their windows dark and empty, weeds forcing their way through cracks in ancient stone. The whole structure looked abandoned, forgotten, left behind by a world that had moved on to newer things. Something in his chest shifted, a sensation he couldn't quite name. He read the sparse description: Fort Esperanza, built 1876, decommissioned 1953, privately owned since 1968, 47 acres, electricity and well water functional. Sold as is, no warranties, serious inquiries only, $12,000. Marcus had $15,000 in his savings account, accumulated from disability payments and the part-time job at the hardware store where his manager looked at him with thinly veiled pity every time he clocked in. $15,000 and a future that felt like staring down a dark tunnel with no light at the end, just more darkness stretching into infinity. Fort Esperanza. The name meant hope in Spanish, though Marcus didn't believe in things like signs or destiny. Still, he couldn't stop looking at those stone walls, imagining himself inside them, alone with nothing but silence and space to breathe. No concerned relatives asking if he was okay when they could see he wasn't. No former unit buddies trying to pull him out for beers, reliving glory days that felt like someone else's memories now. Just him and the desert, and maybe, finally, room to figure out who he was supposed to be without the uniform. Marcus Webb? A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, expression professionally neutral. He grabbed his cane, the metal cool against his palm, and pushed himself up. His left leg protested immediately, that familiar grinding ache that no amount of physical therapy could completely eliminate. He followed the nurse down the too bright hallway to the too small examination room where Dr. Patterson would ask the same questions she always asked, and he would give the same lies he always gave. "How are you sleeping?" Dr. Patterson asked, not looking up from her tablet, fingers swiping through his chart with practiced efficiency. "Fine," Marcus said. The first lie. "Any suicidal thoughts?" "No, ma'am." The second lie. "How's the pain management?" "Manageable." The third lie, though this one lived closer to truth than the others. The physical pain was manageable. It was everything else that was drowning him. Dr. Patterson finally looked up, really looked, and Marcus saw something flicker across her face. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. She knew he was lying. They both knew. But what was the alternative? More pills that turned his thoughts to fog? More therapy sessions where he sat in circles with other broken men, sharing stories that never got lighter no matter how many times they were told? "Marcus," she said, her voice gentler than it had been a moment ago. "You can't heal if you won't let anyone help you." He nodded, the motion automatic and meaningless. "I know, Doc." But he didn't know. He didn't know anything anymore except that the person he'd been before the explosion felt like a character from a book he'd read once, distant and unreachable and probably fictional. That night, Marcus sat alone in Angela's kitchen long after she and her husband Tom had gone to bed. Tom worked night shifts at the hospital, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of wood settling into itself. Marcus opened his laptop, the screen's glow harsh in the darkness, and pulled up the auction listing again. Fort Esperanza stared back at him from the monitor. Those walls, those towers, that enormous courtyard swallowing space. He clicked through every photo, studying details. The way light fell across weathered stone, the depth of shadows in empty doorways, the sheer isolation of the place miles from anything, surrounded by nothing but desert and sky. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe proof that this was crazy, that buying an abandoned fort sight unseen was the kind of decision made by someone who'd lost the thread entirely. But the longer he looked, the more that strange sensation in his chest expanded, filling spaces that had been empty for so long he'd forgotten they existed. No one else would understand. Angela would try, God love her, but she'd ultimately tell him he needed to stay close, needed support, needed community. His VA counselor would call it avoidance, running away from his problems instead of facing them. The few friends who still called occasionally would think he'd finally cracked. Maybe they'd all be right, but Marcus checked the auction details anyway. It ended in 3 days. Current bid, $12,000. Number of bidders, 1. Just the minimum bid, no competition. Like the rest of the world had looked at this place and decided it wasn't worth the trouble. His finger hovered over the place bid button. This was insane. He didn't know anything about maintaining a fort. He'd never even been to New Mexico. What would he do out there? Live like some kind of hermit in the desert, letting the sun bake away whatever was left of him until he was just another weathered stone in a forgotten wall. But then he thought about waking up in Angela's spare bedroom for the 1,001st morning in a row. Thought about the pity in everyone's eyes when they looked at him, like he was something broken that couldn't be fixed. Thought about the crushing certainty that if nothing changed, if he didn't do something different, he would simply cease to exist. Not die exactly, but fade away until there was nothing left but a body going through motions. Marcus placed the bid. $12,500. His heart hammered against his ribs as he hit submit, adrenaline flooding his system the way it used to before missions. The page refreshed. "You are the current high bidder." He slammed the laptop shut and sat in the dark kitchen, hands shaking, wondering what the hell he'd just done, wondering if this was the beginning of something or just another ending dressed up as hope. 3 days passed. Marcus checked the auction obsessively, waiting for someone else to outbid him, almost hoping they would so the decision would be taken out of his hands. But no one did. On the final day, he watched the countdown timer tick down to 0, his leg bouncing with nervous energy, pain shooting up from his knee. Current winner, Marcus Webb. Final bid, $12,500. He stared at the screen until it blurred. Then he made the calls, transferred the money, signed the digital documents that transferred ownership of 47 acres of New Mexico desert and one historic fort into his name. It felt surreal, like playing a character in someone else's story. "You're not seriously going through with this," Angela said the next morning, standing in his doorway with her arms crossed, wearing the expression she'd perfected when they were kids, and he was about to do something spectacularly stupid. Marcus continued folding shirts, placing them carefully in his old military duffel bag. He didn't have much. Most of his possessions had been lost or left behind in the chaos of medical evacuations and discharge paperwork. What remained fit easily into 2 bags. "I already paid," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "You're going to live in an abandoned fort," Angela said slowly, like maybe he didn't understand his own decision. "In the middle of the New Mexico desert. Alone. That's the idea." Marcus. She moved into the room, sitting on the edge of the bed he'd been using. "This isn't healing. This is hiding. You can't just run away from everything." "I'm not running away." "Then what do you call it?" He stopped packing and looked at his sister. Really looked. She had the same dark hair they'd both inherited from their father, the same stubborn jawline, but her eyes were clear and bright where his felt like mud. She had a life that made sense, a husband who loved her, a future that unfolded in predictable, manageable ways. "I call it trying something different," Marcus said quietly. "Because this, what I'm doing here, staying in your spare room, working part-time, pretending I'm okay when we both know I'm not, it's not working. I'm not getting better. I'm just getting more numb." Angela's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared for you," she whispered. "You're not okay, Marcus. And isolating yourself in the middle of nowhere isn't going to make you okay." He wanted to tell her she was wrong, wanted to promise that everything would be fine, that he'd figure it out. But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he crossed the small room and pulled his sister into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender shampoo, the smell of home and safety and everything he was about to leave behind. "I have to try something," he said into her hair. "I can't stay stuck like this. I can't." She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand. "Promise me you'll call. Every week, even if it's just to tell me you're still alive. I promise. And if it gets too hard, if you need to come back." "I know," Marcus interrupted gently. "I know where home is." But even as he said it, he wondered if that was true. If home was a place you could return to, or if it was something you'd lost permanently, left behind on a road in Afghanistan, along with pieces of yourself you'd never get back. The drive to New Mexico took 2 days. Marcus's old Ford truck handled the highway miles with the same stubborn determination that had gotten him through physical therapy, through the journey to walk again, through all the impossible things that had somehow become his new normal. He drove through Texas, watching the landscape gradually transform from green to brown, from humid to dry, from familiar to utterly foreign. He spent the first night in a cheap motel outside Amarillo, where the air conditioning barely worked, and the walls were thin enough to hear every conversation, every television, every life happening around him. He lay awake on sheets that smelled like industrial detergent, his leg throbbing despite the painkillers, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. By late afternoon on the second day, his GPS led him off the interstate onto increasingly smaller roads. Pavement gave way to gravel, then to dirt. The landscape was stark and beautiful in a way that made his chest feel tight, endless red earth stretching to horizons that seemed impossibly far away, mesas rising like ancient monuments to time and erosion, a sky so vast and blue it didn't seem real, more like a painting of what sky should look like. The truck rattled over washboard roads that probably hadn't seen maintenance in years. Dust rose behind him in plumes, coating everything. And then, around a bend following a dry wash, he saw it. Fort Esperanza. Marcus had to pull over because his hands were shaking too hard to keep driving. It rose from the desert floor like something out of a fever dream, like his mind had conjured it from loneliness and desperation. The setting sun painted the stone walls in shades of gold and orange and deep crimson, colors so rich they almost hurt to look at. The photographs hadn't done it justice, hadn't captured the sheer scale of it, the way it dominated the landscape, the sense of weight and permanence radiating from every stone. The outer walls formed a rough square, maybe 200 feet on each side, built from massive blocks of sandstone that had weathered to a dozen different shades of red and tan and rust. 4 towers anchored the corners, their crenellated tops still intact, still watching over emptiness. A single iron gate stood in the center of the front wall, closed but somehow not forbidding, just waiting. Marcus sat in his truck for a long time, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at this impossible thing he'd somehow purchased sight unseen. What was he doing here? What had he been thinking? This wasn't a plan. This was madness, buying a fort in the desert like some kind of crazy person who'd lost all connection to reality. But then, as he sat there in the fading light, something happened. The noise in his head, the constant static that had been his companion for 3 years, the endless loop of explosion and screaming and guilt, it went quiet. Not gone, but muted, like someone had finally turned down the volume on a radio that had been too loud for too long. Out here, there was nothing but wind and stone and the endless desert, no crowds to navigate, no traffic sounds to trigger memories of convoys, no well-meaning questions about how he was doing, really doing, no expectations he was failing to meet. Just silence and space and the strange peace that comes from being truly, completely alone. Marcus grabbed his cane and climbed out of the truck. The iron gate groaned as he pushed it open, hinges protesting with a sound that echoed off the stone walls and came back to him like a greeting. Inside, the courtyard was bigger than he'd imagined. Packed dirt scattered with desert plants, hardy things that had learned to survive on almost nothing. A few pieces of old equipment rusted peacefully in corners, metal slowly returning to earth. Buildings arranged around the perimeter like sentries standing guard over emptiness. Marcus walked slowly, his limp pronounced after hours cramped in the truck. Each step sent pain radiating up from his knee, but he barely noticed. He was too busy taking it all in. The way shadows pooled in doorways, the smell of hot stone and creosote, the absolute silence broken only by the whisper of wind through gaps in the walls. He approached the main building, a long structure with a covered porch running its length. The realtor had sent him keys, though she'd admitted she'd never actually been inside. The previous owner was very private, she'd said, her voice carrying a note of something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Suspicion? Respect? Died about 2 years ago. Estate finally settled. You're getting it cheap because nobody wants to deal with something this remote. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Too smoothly for a building supposedly abandoned for years. The door swung open, and Marcus stepped across the threshold. He'd expected decay, rot and animal nests and the smell of abandonment. Instead, he found order. Dust lay thick over everything, coating surfaces in a fine layer of desert grit. But beneath the dust, the interior was almost pristine. Furniture sat arranged in what must have been a living area. A solid oak table surrounded by chairs with hand-woven seats. Bookcases lined with volumes whose spines he couldn't read in the dim light filtering through dirty windows. The walls were stone, keeping the interior surprisingly cool despite the desert heat outside. Marcus moved through the rooms slowly, his footsteps echoing on wooden floors. A kitchen with both a wood-burning stove and an electric range. An odd combination that spoke to someone hedging their bets against isolation. A bedroom with a simple iron bed frame, mattress long gone but the frame solid. A bathroom with fixtures that looked old but maintained, as if someone had cared for this place right up until they couldn't anymore. And books. Everywhere. Books. Shelves covering every available wall space. Volumes stacked too deep in places. History. Archaeology, languages Marcus didn't recognize, technical manuals for equipment he'd never heard of, journals with leather covers, their pages filled with handwriting too small to read in the fading light. In what appeared to be a study, he found a desk with papers still scattered across its surface, as if someone had simply stood up and walked away mid-sentence. Marcus picked up one of the pages, tilting it toward the window. It was a letter, addressed to someone named Colonel Hartley, dated 1998, the ink slightly faded but still legible. The artifacts from Mosul have been secured. I've catalogued them as discussed. When the political situation stabilizes, we can begin the repatriation process. The pieces are safe here, safer than they would be anywhere else right now. I know you worry, but trust me on this. Some things are worth protecting, even when, especially when, the world seems determined to destroy them. Marcus set the letter down carefully, frowning. Artifacts. What artifacts? And who was protecting what? He explored further, finding more rooms than seemed reasonable for one person. Storage areas filled with crates, their contents unknown. An old armory that now held tools and equipment, everything organized with military precision. A workshop with a lathe and workbenches, sawdust still on the floor, as if the craftsman had just stepped out. Each space was purposeful, intentional, as if someone had been working on long-term projects that required isolation and dedication. This wasn't a fort someone had abandoned. This was a fort someone had lived in, worked in, cared for, right up until they couldn't anymore. As the sun set completely, plunging the interior into darkness, Marcus made his way back to the main living area and managed to get the generator running. It coughed to life on the third try, and lights flickered on throughout the building, revealing details he'd missed in the shadows. The furniture was worn, but quality, built to last. The rugs were faded Persian designs, their patterns still visible beneath decades of foot traffic, and on one wall he found photographs. A man in military uniform, probably in his 30s, standing beside what looked like a younger version of this very fort. The photo was old, maybe from the 70s or 80s based on the quality and color. Another photo showed the same man, older now, silver in his hair, standing with a group of people in front of ancient ruins. A third captured him shaking hands with someone in formal Middle Eastern dress, both men smiling for the camera. Marcus leaned in close, studying the uniformed man's face. There was something in his eyes, an intensity, a purpose, a weight that Marcus recognized immediately because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. The look of someone who'd seen too much and couldn't unsee it, someone carrying burdens that had no place to be set down. He spent the first night in the fort lying in a sleeping bag on the floor of the main room, too exhausted to set up the bed, too wired to actually sleep. Through the windows, he could see stars in numbers he'd never imagined possible. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, so bright it almost hurt to look at. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through gaps in the stone, a sound like breathing. Marcus lay there, staring up at ancient beams and thinking about the man in the photographs. Thinking about what kind of person builds a life in a place like this. What kind of purpose keeps someone going in isolation year after year? What kind of mission matters enough to give up everything else? And for the first time in 3 years, Marcus slept without nightmares. He woke to sunlight pouring through eastern windows and the sound of doves cooing somewhere in the courtyard. His leg ached from sleeping on the hard floor, muscles stiff and protesting, but his mind felt clearer than it had in months, maybe years. He made coffee on the old electric range. Miraculously, the well pump still worked, and carried it out onto the covered porch. The desert stretched in every direction, beautiful and indifferent. Red earth and scattered sage, distant mesas catching the morning light, a landscape that had been here long before him and would be here long after, utterly unconcerned with his problems or pain or purpose. Marcus sipped his coffee and felt something shift inside him, some small piece sliding into place. This place, whatever it was, whatever secrets it held, it was his now. And maybe, just maybe, that meant he could be someone new too. Someone who wasn't defined by what happened to him in Afghanistan. Someone who could build a future instead of just surviving the present. He spent the next 3 days simply exploring, mapping the fort's layout in his mind. The outer walls enclosed roughly 3 acres, maybe a bit more. The buildings were sturdier than he'd expected. The stone construction had weathered decades with minimal damage, testament to whoever had built it back in 1876. He found a cistern system that collected rainwater, still functional. Solar panels on the armory roof, newer additions, feeding batteries that kept basic systems running. Everything spoke to someone who'd thought long-term, who'd planned for isolation, who'd made this place not just livable but sustainable. But it was on the 4th day, while examining the old armory more closely, looking for tools to repair a broken window, that Marcus found something that changed everything. His boot hit a floor stone wrong. The sound was off, hollow where it should have been solid. Marcus froze, then knelt, ignoring the sharp protest from his leg. He ran his fingers along the stone's edge, feeling how it sat slightly different from the ones around it. It shifted when he pressed down on one corner. His heart began to pound, that old combat alertness flooding back. He grabbed a crowbar from a nearby tool rack and carefully pried up the stone. Beneath it was a metal panel with a recessed handle. Marcus sat back on his heels, breathing hard. The fort had a basement, a hidden basement. And judging by the sophisticated lock mechanism he could now see surrounding the handle, it was a secret the previous owner had guarded very carefully. He stared at the panel for a long moment. Every instinct told him to leave it alone, to replace the stone, to pretend he'd never found it. Nothing good came from opening doors that were meant to stay closed. But curiosity, that old enemy, whispered louder than caution. And beneath the curiosity was something else. The sense that this was why he was here. That $12,500 hadn't bought him just a fort to hide in. It had bought him a mystery that needed solving, a purpose that had been waiting for someone to claim it. Marcus grabbed a flashlight from his truck and, after a moment's hesitation that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, pulled the handle. The metal panel lifted with a hiss of air that had been trapped for who knew how long. Wooden stairs led down into darkness, steep and narrow, descending into the unknown. Marcus took a breath, clicked on the flashlight, and stepped into the secret beneath Fort Esperanza. The stairs creaked under his weight, each step a small act of faith that they'd hold. 15 steps down, maybe 20, deep enough that the temperature dropped noticeably, the air growing cool and dry. The flashlight beam swept across a space that shouldn't exist. A room. Roughly 20 feet square, walls lined with metal shelving units that looked military grade, and on those shelves sat crates, dozens of them. Wooden boxes sealed and stamped with markings he couldn't immediately identify, stacked with careful precision. Marcus approached the nearest crate, heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The wood was old but solid, corners reinforced with metal. He set down the flashlight and carefully pried the lid open with the crowbar. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth that crumbled slightly at his touch, were objects that gleamed even in the weak flashlight beam. He lifted one carefully, reverently. It was a ceremonial dagger, its handle inlaid with stones that caught the light and threw it back in colors he didn't have names for. The blade was inscribed with characters he didn't recognize, flowing script that looked ancient. Beside it lay a golden cup, intricately worked with scenes of hunting and celebration, figures carved with such detail he could see expressions on faces thousands of years old. His hands began to shake. He moved to another crate, prying it open with hands that barely cooperated. Inside were coins, ancient coins, hundreds of them, arranged in careful rows, different metals, different sizes, different eras. The next crate held carved statuettes, figures frozen in poses of worship or war or daily life. Another contained tablets covered in wedge-shaped writing he vaguely remembered from some college class, cuneiform, one of humanity's earliest writing systems. Marcus backed up until he hit the opposite wall, legs suddenly weak. He slid down to sit on the cool stone floor, flashlight aimed at the crates, mind racing too fast to catch any single thought. What was this? Where had it come from? And why was it hidden beneath an abandoned fort in the New Mexico desert? He sat there for a long time, maybe an hour, maybe more, trying to process what he was seeing, trying to understand what it meant. Slowly, pieces began connecting. The letter upstairs about artifacts from Mosul, the photographs of the man in uniform standing in front of ancient ruins, the books on archaeology and Middle Eastern history, the careful documentation, the organization, the sense of mission that permeated every corner of this fort. The previous owner, whoever he was, hadn't been hiding here. He'd been guarding something, protecting it, keeping it safe from something or someone. And now, through pure accident, through a $12,000 bid on an online auction, Marcus had inherited that guardianship. He climbed the stairs slowly, his legs screaming, his mind spinning. He emerged into the armory and carefully replaced the stone, hiding the entrance again. Then he walked out into the courtyard and sat heavily on the edge of the well, staring up at the sky as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Everything had changed. He'd come here looking for isolation, for a place to heal in peace, for escape from a world that had become too loud and complicated. Instead, he'd found a mystery that felt bigger than himself, heavier than his own pain, more important than his comfortable numbness. Somewhere beneath his feet lay treasures he didn't understand, couldn't value, didn't know how to protect. But someone had thought they were worth protecting, worth dedicating a life to, worth hiding from the world. Marcus sat in the cooling desert air and realized something. For the first time since the explosion, since the hospital, since coming home to a world that didn't make sense anymore, he felt something other than numbness. He felt alive, and terrified, and curious, and purposeful, all of it tangled together in a knot he couldn't begin to unravel. The sun touched the horizon, painting the fort's walls in shades of fire. Marcus Webb, decorated combat veteran, broken soldier, lost soul, sat in an ancient courtyard in the middle of nowhere and understood that his life had just taken a turn he never could have predicted. He'd bought a fort to disappear. Instead, he'd found something that demanded he be found. Marcus didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. He sat at the old oak desk in the study, surrounded by papers and journals that belonged to a dead man whose name he was only beginning to learn, trying to piece together a story from fragments and shadows. The single desk lamp cast a pool of yellow light in the darkness, and outside the windows, the desert night pressed against the glass like something alive and waiting. Colonel James Hartley. That name appeared again and again in the documents scattered across every surface, letters addressed to him, shipping manifests signed by him, journal entries written in his precise, almost militaristic handwriting. And slowly, page by page, hour by hour, a picture began to emerge that seemed impossible even as the evidence mounted. Marcus picked up a letter dated 2003, the paper brittle with age, and read it for the third time. The looting continues unchecked. Museums ransacked. Archaeological sites destroyed. Priceless artifacts from humanity's cradle disappearing into private collections while we pretend to care about hearts and minds. Someone has to remember. Someone has to preserve what we're allowing to be lost. If not us, then who? He set it down and picked up another, this one from 2007. Recovered 18 pieces from a dealer in Amman. He didn't want to sell, but I convinced him. The Mesopotamian cylinder seals alone are worth a fortune, but their historical value is incalculable. They're documenting them now. When the situation stabilizes, when Iraq has a government that can protect its heritage, I'll find a way to send them home. Until then, they're safer here than anywhere. Marcus leaned back in the chair, running his hands through his hair. The more he read, the more impossible it became, yet the evidence sat in a sealed vault beneath his feet. Hartley had spent decades, possibly his entire retirement, using his military connections and personal wealth to recover stolen artifacts from the Middle East. Not to keep them, or sell them, or build some private collection. To preserve them. To document them. To protect them until they could be safely returned. A journal entry from 2010 laid it out even more clearly. I've become what I fought against. A thief, a smuggler, moving antiquities across borders, paying off customs officials, dealing with black market traders who'd sell their mothers for the right price. But better these treasures sit here in the desert, properly documented and protected, than in some oligarch's vault or destroyed entirely by fanatics who think history is blasphemy. When the wars end, when the governments stabilize, I'll find the right people. I'll send everything home. Until then, I'm their guardian, whether anyone knows it or not. Marcus stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. His leg protested the sudden movement, sending sharp pain up his spine, but he barely noticed. He walked to the window and stared out at the darkness, his reflection ghostly in the glass. 300 items at least, maybe more. He hadn't counted everything in the vault, hadn't even opened all the crates. Mesopotamian artifacts, Persian treasures, Syrian antiquities, Egyptian relics, spanning thousands of years of human history, all hidden beneath a fort that nobody knew existed. And now it was his, all of it. The fort, the collection, the mission, the responsibility. He'd bought it for $12,500 without having any idea what he was really purchasing. What the hell was he supposed to do with it? As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Marcus made a decision. He needed to understand exactly what he had, not just glance at objects in dim flashlight beams, but properly examine, document, catalog. He needed to know what Hartley had been protecting, what he'd died protecting. He spent the morning setting up a proper workspace. He cleared one of the long tables in the armory, the room directly above the hidden vault. He brought up his laptop, a digital camera he'd bought years ago for a photography class he never finished, a notebook, and several lamps. Then, methodically, he began bringing up crates. The first one he opened in full daylight took his breath away all over again. 6 ceremonial daggers, each unique, each a masterpiece of ancient craftsmanship. The handles were inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian, and other stones he couldn't identify. The blades, despite their age, showed the kind of quality that came from master smiths who'd dedicated their lives to perfection. Tucked into the crate beneath the daggers was a small leather notebook. Marcus opened it carefully, the binding cracking slightly. Inside, in Hartley's meticulous handwriting, was a complete description of each piece. Dagger 1, Sumerian, approximately 2600 BCE, purchased from dealer in Istanbul, March 2004. Originally looted from National Museum of Iraq during 2003 chaos. Gold handle with lapis inlay. Ceremonial use likely royal or priestly. Provenance documentation attached. Return to Iraq, Ministry of Culture when stable. Each dagger had similar notes. Where Hartley had acquired it, when, how much he'd paid, where it originally came from, and where it should eventually be returned. The level of detail was staggering. Marcus opened the next crate, gold coins, hundreds of them, arranged in careful rows, another notebook, another comprehensive catalogue. Byzantine Solidus, 6th century CE, collection of 47 pieces acquired from estate sale, Damascus, 2006. Original theft from Syrian archaeological site unknown. Syrian National Museum contact Dr. El-Khoury. The pattern repeated with every crate he opened. Painted pottery fragments from ancient Persia, bronze statues from Assyrian temples, clay tablets covered in cuneiform writing, jewelry that had adorned kings and queens 3,000 years ago. And with every single item, Hartley had left notes. Detailed, precise, almost obsessive documentation of what it was, where it came from, where it should go. This wasn't a collection, it was an archive, a refugee camp for treasures fleeing war and chaos and greed. By mid-afternoon, Marcus had examined maybe a quarter of the vault's contents, and he was overwhelmed. The sheer scope of what Hartley had accomplished was staggering. But so was the danger Marcus now found himself in. These weren't just historically significant objects, they were worth millions, tens of millions, maybe more. He was sitting at the workspace photographing a Persian rhyton shaped like a leaping ibex when he heard something that made his blood run cold. An engine, distant but approaching. Marcus moved to the window, careful to stay in shadows. A cloud of dust rose from the access road, marking the progress of a vehicle. His truck was the only one that should be out here. The fort was miles from anything, invisible from the main highway, accessible only by a dirt track that most people would assume led nowhere. The vehicle was a black SUV, expensive and completely out of place in the desert. It pulled up to the fort's gate and stopped. A man climbed out, mid-40s maybe, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt like he was on his way to a business meeting instead of visiting an abandoned fort in the middle of nowhere. Marcus's hand instinctively went to his hip, muscle memory reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there anymore. He watched as the man approached the gate, looked around the courtyard, then knocked on the main building's door. Every instinct Marcus had developed over years of combat training screamed danger. Nobody just showed up here. Nobody knew he'd bought the place except Angela and the realtor. This wasn't a friendly visit. Marcus grabbed his phone and quickly took several photos of the man and the SUV, including the license plate. Then he walked to the door and opened it, keeping his body language casual despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Help you?" Marcus called out. The man turned and Marcus caught the flash of surprise quickly masked by a professional smile. "Marcus Webb? Who's asking?" "My name is Richard Brennan. I'm a private acquisitions consultant." He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. "I work with collectors who have particular interests in certain types of historical items." Marcus didn't move to take the card. "I'm not selling anything." Brennan's smile didn't waver. "I haven't made an offer yet. May I come in? It's rather hot out here." "No." That made the smile slip slightly. "Mr. Webb, I think we may have gotten off on the wrong foot. I'm here because I've heard that Colonel Hartley's property has finally changed hands. The Colonel and I had a relationship. I was hoping to continue that relationship with the new owner." "What kind of relationship?" "A mutually beneficial one. The Colonel occasionally provided me with information about items that might be of interest to my clients. In exchange, I provided him with resources and connections." Marcus's jaw tightened. This man was a middleman for artifact smugglers. Had to be. And he was either lying about knowing Hartley or Hartley had been playing a deeper game than his journals suggested. Like I said, I'm not selling anything. You should leave. Brennan's expression hardened slightly, the professional mask slipping to show something colder underneath. I don't think you understand the situation, Mr. Webb. The items in Colonel Hartley's possession, they've attracted interest from some very serious people, very wealthy people, very connected people, the kind of people who don't like to be disappointed. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're a veteran, correct? Decorated soldier, injured in combat, struggling to adjust to civilian life. Brennan's smile returned, sharper now. I've done my research. You bought this place for basically nothing, probably hoping for a quiet place to recover. I respect that. But you've inherited more than you realize, and people know it. The smart play is to work with me. I can facilitate transactions that would set you up for life. All you have to do is look the other way while we inventory certain items. Marcus took a slow breath, controlling his temper. Get off my property. Don't be foolish. My clients are prepared to be very generous. I'm going to count to 3. If you're not in that SUV heading back the way you came, I'm calling the sheriff. Brennan stared at him for a long moment, reassessing. Then he set his business card on the well cover. Think about it, Mr. Webb. I'll be in touch. And fair warning, if you won't work with me, there are others who will be less polite in their approach. He walked back to the SUV with unhurried confidence, climbed in and drove away, leaving another cloud of dust hanging in the still air. Marcus waited until the vehicle disappeared from sight before he moved. Then he grabbed the business card, tore it in half, and threw the pieces in the trash. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from anger. And something else, a sense that he'd just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He pulled out his phone and called the only person he could think of who might understand. Marcus, Angela answered on the second ring. Is everything okay? I need your help, or actually, I need you to help me find someone who can help me. What's wrong? You sound weird. Marcus looked around the fort, at the stone walls that had become his sanctuary, at the armory door hiding secrets that people would kill for. It's complicated, really complicated, but I think I might have stumbled into something bigger than I can handle alone. There was a pause on the other end. Then Angela said, Tell me everything. So he did. He told her about the hidden vault, about the artifacts, about Hartley's journals, and the decades-long mission to preserve stolen treasures. He told her about Brennan's visit and the implied threats. He didn't hold anything back because suddenly, keeping it secret felt more dangerous than sharing it. When he finished, Angela was quiet for so long Marcus thought the call had dropped. Angela? I'm here. I'm just Jesus, Marcus. This is insane. You found what? Hundreds of stolen artifacts? Not stolen by me. Not even stolen by Hartley exactly. He was recovering them from people who stole them, buying them back, smuggling them out of war zones, protecting them. That's still probably super illegal. I know, but what am I supposed to do? Turn everything over to the FBI. They'll seize it all, tie it up in bureaucracy for decades. Some of it might never make it back to where it belongs. Or I could do what Hartley wanted, find a way to return everything properly. Or you could sell it and be set for life, Angela said quietly. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Is that what you think I should do? No, God, no. I know you better than that. But someone had to say it out loud so you know what you're choosing to walk away from. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. I can't sell it, Ange. These things, they belong to people, to countries, to history. They deserve to go home. Then you need help. Real help. Let me make some calls. I know someone who teaches archaeology at a university in Arizona. Maybe they can point you in the right direction. After they hung up, Marcus returned to the armory and stood looking at the workspace he'd set up. The Persian Rhyton still sat there, frozen mid-leap for 3,000 years, waiting for someone to give it purpose again. He spent the rest of the day methodically exploring the fort more thoroughly, looking for anything else Hartley might have hidden. In the main building, he found a wall safe behind a painting of the fort itself. The combination was written in the back of one of Hartley's journals, another thing the man had left behind like breadcrumbs for whoever came after. Inside the safe were more documents, shipping manifests disguised as furniture deliveries, correspondence with museum curators, archaeologists, even some black market dealers, bank statements showing massive withdrawals over decades. Hartley had poured his entire fortune into this mission, but there was also something else. A smaller journal, leather-bound and worn, that looked more personal than the others. Marcus sat at the desk and opened it. The entries were sporadic, dated across many years, more meditation than documentation. May 2001. People ask me why I care so much about objects when humans are suffering. But these aren't just objects, they're memory made solid. When we lose them, we lose pieces of ourselves. Every artifact destroyed is a story silenced forever. August 2003. I watched the Baghdad Museum being looted on television, watched people carrying out treasures while soldiers stood by doing nothing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fly there and stand in front of those doors myself. Instead, I started making calls. If I can't stop the theft, maybe I can recover what's stolen. December 2007. Bought 40 pieces today from a dealer in Beirut. He wanted to sell them to a private collector in London. I outbid the collector, probably made an enemy, don't care. These cylinder seals belong to the Iraqi National Museum. They're going home eventually, even if I have to wait 20 more years. March 2012. Sometimes I wonder if I've lost my mind. Living alone in the desert, spending every penny I have on artifacts most people will never see. But then I think about the alternative. I think about these treasures in private vaults, hidden from the world, or worse, destroyed because fanatics decided history offends them. And I know I'm doing the right thing, even if no one ever knows I did it. January 2018. I'm getting old. 73 this year. I can feel my body failing, can feel time running out. I won't live to see these pieces return home. That knowledge sits heavy on my chest at night. But maybe that's okay. Maybe someone else will find them. Someone younger, stronger. Someone with the energy to finish what I started. I have to believe that. It's the only way I can sleep. Marcus closed the journal, his throat tight. Hartley had known he wouldn't finish his mission, had known someone else would have to carry it forward. And somehow, through bizarre chance or fate or pure accident, that someone was Marcus. A broken soldier who'd bought a fort to disappear had inherited a purpose bigger than himself. Over the next 3 days, Marcus worked like a man possessed. He photographed every item he could access, documented what Hartley had already catalogued, cross-referenced the journals with the artifacts themselves. He set up a basic inventory system on his laptop, creating a database of what existed and where it should eventually go. Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Afghanistan, Jordan, Lebanon. Items from across the Middle East, each one ripped from its home during wars and chaos and human greed. But as he worked, Marcus also began to understand the security measures Hartley had built. The fort wasn't just a hiding place, it was a fortress, literally and figuratively. He discovered the security system almost by accident. While exploring one of the towers, he found a small control panel hidden behind a loose stone. When he opened it, a screen flickered to life, showing camera feeds from multiple angles. The fort had surveillance. Cameras disguised as stones in the walls, motion sensors along the access road, even seismic detectors that could pick up approaching vehicles miles away. The system was sophisticated, probably military grade, and it was still operational, which meant Hartley had maintained it right up until his death, which meant he'd known the danger he was in, known that people were watching, waiting for an opportunity. Marcus accessed the system's logs and felt his blood run cold. There were dozens of recorded events over the years, vehicles approaching and being turned away, people scouting the perimeter, even a few attempts at forced entry that had triggered alarms. Hartley had lived under siege, quietly, constantly, for decades, and now Marcus had inherited that siege. He was reviewing camera footage from 2 years ago when he noticed something in one of the tower rooms he hadn't explored yet. The camera angle showed what looked like a false wall, slightly different color stone than the surroundings. Marcus climbed the tower stairs, his leg protesting every step. The room was small, probably used as a lookout post originally. Stone walls, narrow windows, empty except for dust. But when he examined the section he'd seen on camera, he found the seam. Another hidden panel. This one didn't have an obvious lock. Marcus spent 20 minutes running his hands over every stone, pressing, pulling, testing. Finally, one stone depressed slightly with a click, and a section of wall swung inward. Behind it was a space about 6 feet square. And in that space sat something that made everything else seem small by comparison. A vault. A real vault, the kind you'd find in a bank, with a combination lock and reinforced steel door. And on that door was a handwritten note taped in plastic. To whoever finds this, inside is documentation for everything: provenance records, authentication certificates, contact information for museums and cultural ministries. Also my will, stating that all items should be returned to their countries of origin. You'll need proof that this was my intention. This is that proof. Good luck. You're going to need it. J.H. Marcus's hands shook as he tried the combination written on the note. The lock opened with a satisfying click. Inside the vault was exactly what Hartley had promised: binders full of documentation, certificates of authenticity from reputable experts, letters from museum directors, contacts in cultural ministries across the Middle East, and a legal will properly notarized, stating clearly that Colonel James Hartley's entire collection of Middle Eastern antiquities should be repatriated to their countries of origin through proper diplomatic channels. There was also a letter sealed in an envelope with Marcus's name on it, except it didn't have Marcus's name. It said, "To the new owner of Fort Esperanza." Marcus sat down hard on the stone floor and opened the letter with trembling fingers. Dear stranger, if you're reading this, then I'm dead, and my fort has found a new owner. I hope you're someone decent. I hope you're someone who understands that some things are bigger than personal gain. In this vault and in the vault beneath the armory, you'll find approximately 300 artifacts recovered from war zones across the Middle East. I spent 40 years and every dollar I had collecting them, not for myself, but to keep them safe until they could go home. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is insane. You're thinking I was a crazy old man living alone in the desert, obsessed with objects instead of people. Maybe you're right. But these aren't just objects. They're memory. They're heritage. They're proof that civilizations rise and fall, but human creativity endures. Every piece in my collection was stolen during war or chaos. Museums looted, archaeological sites destroyed, treasures disappearing into private collections where no one will ever see them. I couldn't stop the wars. I couldn't prevent the theft. But I could recover what was stolen. I could preserve it. I could document it. I could keep it safe until the day when it could be properly returned. That day never came for me. I'm old now, sick, running out of time. But maybe you're the person who can finish this. Maybe you're young enough, strong enough, brave enough to do what I couldn't. Be warned, this mission will cost you. People want these artifacts. Collectors who'll pay millions. Criminals who'll kill for them. Even governments who'll try to seize them. You'll face pressure from every direction to abandon this cause. But if you can withstand that pressure, if you can see this through, you'll do something extraordinary. You'll return stolen heritage to people who've lost so much already. You'll prove that integrity still exists in a world that seems to value only profit. I don't know who you are, but I believe you're the right person, because the wrong person would have sold everything already. The fact that you've found this letter means you've been searching, trying to understand. That gives me hope. The documentation in this vault will help you. I've identified every piece, verified its authenticity, and noted where it should be returned. I've even made contact with cultural officials in several countries, people who understand what I was trying to do. All you have to do is finish it, please. These treasures deserve to go home. And whoever you are, whatever brought you to Fort Esperanza, I think maybe you deserve a purpose that matters. Good luck. You're going to need it. With hope and gratitude, Colonel James Hartley. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. He sat in that small room at the top of the tower as the sun set outside, painting the desert in shades of fire, and felt the weight of Hartley's mission settle onto his shoulders like a mantle. He'd come to New Mexico to escape, to heal in isolation, to disappear from a world that hurt too much to engage with. Instead, he'd found a mission that demanded he engage more fully than he'd engaged with anything since the explosion that shattered his leg and his sense of purpose. These artifacts needed a guardian. Hartley had been that guardian for 40 years. Now he was asking Marcus to take up that role. The smart thing would be to walk away, call the authorities, hand everything over, wash his hands of the whole complicated mess, or sell it all and be set for life, like Angela had said. Either option would be easier than what Hartley was asking, but Marcus didn't want easy anymore. Easy had left him numb and purposeless. Easy had turned him into someone who existed but didn't really live. He stood up, his legs screaming from sitting on the cold stone floor. He walked to the tower window and looked out over the fort, over the desert beyond. Somewhere beneath his feet lay 300 pieces of history waiting for someone to take them home. Marcus Webb, decorated combat veteran, had spent 3 years looking for a reason to keep going. Now he'd found one, hidden beneath an abandoned fort in the New Mexico desert. He wasn't going to waste it. He descended the tower stairs and walked to the armory. He stood over the hidden entrance to the vault and made a decision that would change everything. He was going to finish what Hartley started. He was going to return every single artifact to where it belonged, not for money, not for recognition, not even for his own healing, though he suspected it might heal him anyway. He was going to do it because it was right, because someone had to, because Hartley had spent 4 decades guarding these treasures alone, and he deserved someone to complete his mission. Marcus opened his laptop and started making a plan. First, he needed to fully catalog everything. Then he needed to find experts who could verify what he had. Then he needed to contact the countries who'd lost these pieces. And through it all, he needed to keep everything secret and secure from people like Brennan, who would kill to possess what he was trying to give away. It was insane. It was impossible. It was probably illegal in ways he didn't even understand yet. But for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Webb felt like he had a purpose worth the pain of being alive. Outside, the desert night settled over Fort Esperanza. And inside, a broken soldier began the long work of becoming something more. Not by healing his wounds, but by giving them a purpose. By channeling his pain into protection, his isolation into guardianship, his brokenness into something that might, eventually, become whole. The fort had given him shelter. The artifacts had given him purpose. Now he just had to survive long enough to see it through. Marcus spent the next week living between 2 worlds. During the day, he was a reclusive fort owner, visible only when he drove into the small town of Esperanza for supplies. At night, he became something else entirely. A detective piecing together the life of a man he'd never met. a guardian preparing to defend treasures he was only beginning to understand. The town of Esperanza sat 23 miles from the fort, barely large enough to warrant a dot on most maps. One main street with a gas station, a diner, a general store, and a scattering of adobe houses baking under the relentless New Mexico sun. Population 312, according to the faded sign at the town limits. The kind of place people left, not the kind they came to. Marcus had driven through twice for basic supplies, keeping his head down, avoiding conversation. But on his third visit, he couldn't avoid it anymore. "You're the one who bought the old fort," a voice said, as Marcus was loading groceries into his truck. He turned to find a woman standing there, maybe 60 years old, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing an apron that identified her as Rosa from the diner. "That's quite an investment for a place nobody's touched in 2 years. "Just needed some space," Marcus said, keeping his tone neutral. Rosa studied him with eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by deflection. "You military?" Marcus tensed. "What makes you say that?" "The haircut, the way you stand, the look in your eyes." She smiled gently. "My son did 3 tours in Afghanistan. I know that look. Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone, you know." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He managed a nod but couldn't find words. Rosa seemed to understand. She handed him a flyer from her apron pocket. "Community dinner tomorrow night at the church. Nothing fancy, just food and neighbors. You'd be welcome if you wanted to come. Sometimes the best healing happens around other people, not away from them." She walked away before Marcus could respond, leaving him standing by his truck with a flyer he'd probably throw away and a feeling he couldn't quite name. That night, back at the fort, Marcus returned to Hartley's journals with renewed focus. He needed to understand not just what the colonel had collected, but why. What drove a man to spend 40 years in isolation, pouring his fortune into recovering artifacts most people would never see? He found part of the answer in a journal entry from 2005, "Spoke with Dr. Yasmin Al-Khoury today, director of what's left of the Baghdad Museum." She wept on the phone, describing what's been lost. 3,000 years of human achievement, gone in weeks of chaos. She said something that's haunted me all day. When they destroy our history, they're trying to erase proof that we were ever civilized, that we ever mattered. Every artifact lost is another piece of our identity stolen. I thought about that after we hung up. Identity. That's what this is really about. These objects aren't just valuable, they're proof. Proof that Mesopotamia gave us writing, mathematics, the wheel. Proof that Persia created art and poetry and philosophy that influenced the entire world. Proof that Syria and Egypt and Afghanistan were homes to civilizations when most of Europe was still tribal. When we allow their heritage to be looted and destroyed, we're not just losing objects, we're helping erase civilizations from memory. I can't stop the wars, can't prevent the chaos, but I can save what fragments I can reach. I can preserve proof that these cultures mattered, that they contributed immeasurably to human progress, that they deserve to reclaim what's theirs. Marcus set down the journal and stared at the photographs on the wall. Hartley standing in front of ancient ruins. Hartley shaking hands with men in traditional Middle Eastern dress. Hartley alone in the desert, silver-haired and determined, a man on a mission the world would never fully understand. For the first time, Marcus felt a connection to this stranger. They'd both served. They'd both seen destruction that changed them. They'd both come home carrying weight that couldn't be measured in pounds or articulated in therapy sessions. The difference was Hartley had found a way to channel that weight into something meaningful. Marcus was still figuring out if he could do the same. The first real threat came on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was in the armory, photographing a collection of Assyrian cylinder seals, when the security system alerted him to movement on the access road. He pulled up the camera feeds and felt his blood chill. 3 vehicles this time, not one. Two black SUVs and a panel van, moving in formation with military precision. He quickly closed and locked the vault entrance, grabbed his phone, and moved to a position where he could observe without being immediately visible. His combat training, dormant for 3 years, snapped into focus. Assess the threat, identify exits, prepare for contact. The vehicles pulled up to the fort's gate and stopped. 6 men climbed out, all wearing casual clothes that somehow looked like uniforms. They moved like operators, like people trained to work as a unit. One of them, a tall man with silver hair and an expensive watch, approached the gate while the others fanned out, surveying the perimeter. Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Webb?" The silver-haired man's voice came through the phone even as Marcus watched him through the window. "I can see you're watching. Smart. I'm Jonathan Cross. I represent a consortium of collectors with interests in Middle Eastern antiquities. We'd like to discuss a business proposition." "Not interested," Marcus said. "You haven't heard the offer." "Don't need to. Nothing here is for sale." Cross's expression hardened slightly, visible even at a distance. "I think you misunderstand the situation. We're not asking permission. Colonel Hartley was a thorn in our side for years, buying items we'd already negotiated for, interfering with established market channels. His death opened opportunities. We'd prefer to handle this civilly, but we will have what we came for." Marcus felt rage building in his chest. "You're threatening me on my own property. That was your first mistake. You're also being recorded by about a dozen security cameras. That was your second. You've got 30 seconds to get back in those vehicles and leave before I call every law enforcement agency in New Mexico." "Call them," Cross said calmly. "By the time they arrive, we'll have loaded what we need and be gone. You're one man with a limp, Mr. Webb. We're 6 professionals. Do the math." Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. Every instinct screamed to grab a weapon, to defend his position, to fight. But 6 against 1, with his mobility compromised, would end badly. He needed a different approach. "You're right," Marcus said, forcing his voice to calm. "I can't stop 6 of you, but I can make sure you get nothing. See that building behind me, the one with the metal roof? That's where Hartley stored everything. It's also rigged with accelerants. I press one button on this phone and everything inside burns. Every artifact, every coin, every piece of pottery, all of it becomes ash before you can open a single crate." Cross froze. "You're bluffing. Try me. Hartley spent 40 years collecting these pieces to preserve them. You really think he didn't have a plan for what to do if people like you came calling?" "I found his contingency protocols. This fort is wired. One button, and your consortium gets nothing but insurance claims." It was a complete lie. But it was a good lie, and Marcus sold it with the confidence of a man who'd learned to lie convincingly when lives depended on it. Cross studied the fort, calculating. Finally he said, "This isn't over." "Looking forward to round 2. Now get off my property." The vehicles left, but Marcus knew they'd be back, and next time they might call his bluff. He spent the rest of the day actually implementing what he'd claimed, setting up a real security protocol. He couldn't rig the fort to burn. That defeated the entire purpose. But he could create layered defenses, better alarms, panic buttons that would alert authorities if he needed them. He was testing the new motion sensors when his phone rang again. This time it was Angela. "I found someone," she said without preamble. "Her name is Sofia Reyes. She teaches history at the regional high school in Esperanza, but she's got a master's degree in Middle Eastern archaeology from Berkeley. Used to work on excavations in Jordan before she came back home. Rosa from the diner connected me. Apparently Sofia is her niece." Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. An expert. Someone who might actually understand what he had and what it meant. "Did you tell her anything?" "Just that you'd found some items of potential historical significance and needed consultation. She's interested. Wants to meet you." "Okay, yeah, that's good. Thank you, Ange." "Marcus, be careful. This is getting dangerous." "I know. But I can't walk away from it. These things need to go home. Hartley spent his life making that possible. I have to finish it." There was a pause. Then Angela said quietly, "He'd be proud of you, Hartley. I think he'd be proud that you're the one who found his work." After they hung up, Marcus sat in the gathering darkness and wondered if that was true. Would Hartley be proud, or would he think Marcus was just another fool who didn't understand what he was getting into? He met Sophia Reyes the next afternoon at her request in the high school parking lot after her last class. She was younger than he expected, maybe early 30s, with dark curly hair pulled into a ponytail and eyes that assessed him with academic curiosity. "Mr. Webb," she said, extending her hand, "Rosa's told me about you, says you're carrying something heavy. She's usually right about these things." Marcus shook her hand. "Call me Marcus. And yeah, I guess I am. Want to tell me what it is?" He looked around the empty parking lot, considering. Then he made a decision. "Not here. Can you come to the fort? What I need to show you, it's not something I can explain. You have to see it." Sophia studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Tomorrow? I have Saturday free." "Tomorrow works." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Cross and his team, about Brennan before him, about how many others might be watching and waiting. The fort felt exposed suddenly, vulnerable despite its stone walls. He walked the ramparts until dawn, a ghost guarding ghosts, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. When Sophia arrived the next morning, Marcus led her directly to the armory without preamble. He opened the vault entrance and gestured down. "After you," he said. Sophia descended the stairs with a flashlight he'd provided, and Marcus heard her sharp intake of breath when she reached the bottom. He followed her down to find her standing frozen, staring at the crates and shelves. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Open one." She approached the nearest crate with trembling hands and carefully lifted the lid. Inside were gold coins, ancient and perfect, arranged in careful rows. Sophia pulled out a jeweler's loupe from her bag, she'd come prepared, and examined one closely. "This is a Sasanian drachm," she said, her voice shaking. "4th century, museum quality. Where did you get this?" "It's not where I got it. It's where Colonel Hartley got it. Every piece in this vault, he recovered it from the black market or from looters. He was trying to save them, planning to return them to their countries of origin." Sophia set down the coin carefully and turned to face him. "Do you have any idea what you're showing me? This is decades of looted heritage. Some of these pieces are probably on international stolen art registries. Possessing them could land you in prison." "I know. That's why I need help." For the next 3 hours, Sophia moved through the vault like a woman in a dream, examining artifacts, cross-referencing Hartley's documentation, occasionally making sounds of disbelief or wonder. She handled a Mesopotamian cylinder seal with reverence, studied cuneiform tablets with tears in her eyes, photographed Persian jewelry with hands that shook. Finally, she climbed back up to the armory and sat heavily on a workbench. "Marcus, this collection is worth hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe more, and every piece of it belongs to countries that have been torn apart by war. I want to give it back, all of it. That's what Hartley wanted. I need to know if it's even possible." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. "It's possible. Difficult, complicated, potentially dangerous, but possible. You'd need to work with cultural ministries, probably through diplomatic channels. You'd need authentication from experts, legal documentation proving Hartley's intent to repatriate. You'd need security to keep it safe until transfer can be arranged. Can you help me?" "Why?" Sophia asked. "Why not sell it? You could be set for life, never work again. No one would blame you." Marcus thought about the question, about the 3 years he'd spent numb and purposeless, about the explosion that had shattered more than just his leg, about Hartley's journals and the mission the old colonel had died trying to complete. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. And because I need something in my life to be about more than just survival. I need to build something that matters." Sophia smiled. "Then yes, I'll help you." What happens next will test everything Marcus has rebuilt, reveal threats he never saw coming, and force him to choose between safety and honor, between walking away and standing guard. Stay tuned because the fight for these treasures is about to get real. If you're enjoying this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more incredible journeys. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Sophia came to the fort 3 or 4 times a week, bringing equipment and expertise. They photographed every item, documented provenance, cross-referenced Hartley's notes with international databases of looted artifacts. They discovered pieces that had been missing for decades, items museums had long ago written off as lost forever. But they also discovered something else. They weren't working alone anymore. Sophia had quietly reached out to 2 of her former professors, both retired, both experts in Middle Eastern archaeology. Dr. Raymond Williams specialized in Mesopotamian artifacts. Dr. Anjali Patel focused on Persian antiquities. Both had agreed to consult, drawn by the chance to handle items they'd thought destroyed. When they arrived at the fort for the first time and saw what Marcus had, both stood in stunned silence for a full minute. "My God," Dr. Williams finally whispered. "I thought these seals were destroyed when the National Museum was looted. We have photographs, documentation, but we thought the originals were gone forever." "They're not gone," Sophia said quietly. "They were being protected, and now we're going to send them home." The 4 of them became a team. They set up a proper laboratory space in one of the fort's larger rooms, with controlled temperature, proper lighting, and archival materials. They worked methodically, treating each artifact with the reverence it deserved. Marcus found himself learning despite having no background in archaeology. Dr. Patel taught him how to handle ancient pottery without damaging it. Dr. Williams showed him how to read cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script pressed into clay tablets thousands of years ago. Sophia explained the historical context, bringing dead civilizations to life through stories of kings and merchants and ordinary people. For the first time since before the explosion, Marcus felt his mind engaged. Not just surviving, but learning, growing, contributing to something larger than himself. But the threats didn't stop. They escalated. Someone cut the fort's power line late one night, forcing Marcus to run on generator power until he could arrange repairs. He found fresh tire tracks around the perimeter that didn't match any vehicle he recognized. His truck was vandalized, windows smashed, tires slashed, and the messages started coming. Text messages from unknown numbers. "Last chance. Sell or face consequences." Emails with no sender. "You're in over your head. People have died protecting secrets smaller than yours." Even a physical letter, left tucked under the fort's gate. "Hartley was a fool. Don't be the next casualty." Marcus reported it all to the county sheriff, a weary man named Tom Braddock, who seemed more annoyed than concerned. "Look, Mr. Webb, I understand you're worried, but vandalism happens. Threats happen. Unless someone actually tries to hurt you, there's not much I can do. Best advice? Install better locks and maybe consider an alarm system." Marcus already had an alarm system. What he needed was backup, and he found it in an unexpected place. Rosa's community dinner. He'd avoided it the first time she invited him, and the second, and the third. But after the 4th invitation, delivered personally with a plate of homemade tamales and a look that suggested refusal wasn't really an option, Marcus gave in. The church basement was packed with people when he arrived. Families, seniors, teenagers, all gathered around tables laden with food. Marcus stood in the doorway, feeling exposed and uncomfortable, ready to turn around and leave. Then Sophia spotted him. She was helping set out plates, her Aunt Rosa directing traffic like a general commanding troops. Sophia smiled and waved him over. "You came," she said. "I wasn't sure you would."
"Me either,"
She introduced him around, names and faces blurred together. But slowly, through conversations over beans and rice and stories shared between bites of cornbread, Marcus began to understand something about Esperanza. This town was dying, had been dying for years. Young people left for cities with better jobs. Businesses closed. Schools lost funding. The people who remained were holding on through sheer stubbornness, through community, through the belief that their home still mattered. An old man named Victor, who'd taught at the high school for 40 years before retiring, explained it. "We used to be something, mining town back in the day. Then the mines closed, lost half our population in 10 years. Now we're just the place people pass through on their way to somewhere else. But some of us remember when Esperanza meant something, when it lived up to its name, hope." That's what Esperanza meant. Hope in a language most of the residents didn't speak anymore, in a town that was running out of reasons to hope. After dinner, a teenage girl approached Marcus shyly. She couldn't have been more than 15, wearing a high school hoodie and carrying herself with the uncertain confidence of someone trying to figure out who they were becoming. "Mr. Webb," she said, "Miss Reyes told us about the artifacts you found. Is it true? Did you really find treasure from ancient Mesopotamia?" Marcus glanced at Sophia, who shrugged apologetically. "I might have mentioned it to my advanced history class. Very vague details, but they're excited about real archaeology happening here." The girl, whose name turned out to be Elena, looked at him with eyes that reminded Marcus painfully of younger soldiers he'd served with. Eager, curious, hungry for something meaningful to believe in. "It's true," Marcus said. "Colonel Hartley spent 40 years collecting artifacts that were stolen from their homes. We're working to return them." "That's amazing," Elena breathed. "We did a unit on cultural heritage destruction in Miss Reyes's class. She showed us pictures of what ISIS did to Palmyra, how they destroyed temples that were thousands of years old. She said every artifact saved is a victory against that kind of hatred." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He'd been thinking of the artifacts as objects, valuable but inanimate. But Elena saw them as something else, symbols, proof that beauty could survive destruction. Hope made solid. "Would you ever let us see them?" Elena asked. "Not touch, just see? It would mean a lot to actually witness history instead of just reading about it." Marcus looked at Sophia, who was watching the exchange with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then he looked back at Elena. "Maybe," he said, "if we can figure out how to do it safely." Elena's face lit up like he'd promised her the moon. That night, driving back to the fort under a sky full of stars, Marcus thought about Elena's excitement, about Victor's quiet resignation, about Rosa's determination to feed everyone who walked through her door. He thought about a town named Hope that was losing its reasons to hope, and a collection of ancient treasures that proved human civilization could survive its darkest moments. An idea began forming, one that terrified him as much as it excited him. When he got back to the fort, he found Dr. Williams and Dr. Patel still working in the laboratory they'd set up, both bent over a clay tablet covered in cuneiform script. "Marcus," Dr. Williams said without looking up, "come look at this. This tablet is a merchant's account from Ur, dated to approximately 2200 BCE. It's describing a trade shipment of copper and wool. 4,200 years ago, someone sat down and recorded a mundane business transaction, and now we're reading it. That's extraordinary." Marcus stood behind them, looking at the ancient writing. "Dr. Williams, can I ask you something? Why does this matter? I mean, I understand it's old and rare, but why does it actually matter?" Dr. Williams set down his magnifying glass and looked at Marcus with surprise. "You're asking the fundamental question of archaeology. Why preserve the past when the present needs so much attention?" "Yeah, I guess I am." "Because memory matters," Dr. Patel answered, joining the conversation. "This tablet proves that 4,000 years ago, people in Mesopotamia had complex economies, written language, trade networks. They were civilized, sophisticated, human in ways we recognize. When we lose artifacts like this, we lose proof of that humanity. We make it easier for people to dehumanize entire cultures, to treat the Middle East as if it's always been a place of violence and chaos instead of the cradle of human civilization. Every artifact we save, Dr. Williams added, is a counter-argument to hatred. It's proof that Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, these places gave the world mathematics, astronomy, medicine, art, poetry. When we return these items, we're not just giving back objects, we're giving back pride, identity, memory. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood now why Hartley had dedicated his life to this. And he understood what he needed to do next. "I want to do something before we start the repatriation process," he said. "I want to open the fort to the town, just for a day. Let people see what Hartley was protecting, especially the kids. Let them understand that this history isn't just in books, it's real, it's here, and it matters." Sophia, who'd been standing in the doorway listening, smiled. "That's a beautiful idea. And risky as hell. The more people who know about this, the more danger you're in." "I know, but Elena asked if she could see real history instead of just reading about it. And I keep thinking about this town, about how it's named Hope, but seems to be running out of it. Maybe this could give them something. Proof that beautiful things can survive, that preservation matters, that one person's mission can change the world." Dr. Williams and Dr. Patel exchanged glances. Then Dr. Williams said, "Hartley would approve. He spent 40 years hiding these pieces, but only because he had to. His dream was always to share them eventually, to let them teach and inspire. If you can do that safely, even briefly, it honors his mission." Over the next week, they planned carefully. Sophia coordinated with the school, selecting 20 students from her advanced history classes, juniors and seniors mature enough to understand the significance and responsibility. They'd come on a Saturday, spend 3 hours learning about the artifacts and the mission to return them. Marcus reinforced security. He arranged for Sheriff Braddock to do extra patrols that day, though he didn't explain why. He set up additional cameras. He made sure the most valuable pieces were documented and could be quickly secured if anything went wrong. The night before the visit, he walked the fort's walls and wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. Opening his sanctuary to outsiders. Exposing Hartley's life's work to potential theft or damage. Putting himself in a position where he'd have to interact with people, explain himself, be vulnerable. But then he thought about Elena's eager face. About a town slowly dying that might need to remember what hope looked like. About Hartley's words in the journal. These treasures deserve to be seen, to teach, to inspire. Hiding them is necessary now, but not forever. The students arrived at 9 in the morning, climbing out of a school bus with Sophia and Rosa chaperoning. Marcus watched from the gate as they approached, their chatter falling silent as they took in the massive stone walls, the towers, the sheer improbability of a fort in the middle of the desert. Elena was first through the gate, her eyes wide with wonder. "This place is incredible," she breathed. Marcus gave them a tour, starting with Hartley's story. He showed them the photographs of the colonel, read excerpts from his journals, explained the 40-year mission to recover and preserve. The students listened with an attention that reminded Marcus why teachers like Sophia chose this work. Then he took them to the laboratory. Dr. Williams and Dr. Patel had carefully selected items to display. Nothing irreplaceable or fragile, but pieces that would inspire and educate. Coins from ancient Persia, a clay tablet from Babylon, a bronze statue of an Assyrian guardian, pottery painted with scenes from daily life 4,000 years ago. Marcus watched the students' faces as they encountered actual history. Some took photos, Some just stared in silence. Elena stood in front of the Babylonian tablet for a full 5 minutes, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked quietly. "Nothing's wrong," she whispered. "It's just, my family is from Iraq. My grandparents left during the war, came here with nothing. They used to tell me stories about ancient Babylon, about how our ancestors invented writing and mathematics. But I never really believed it mattered. Like, who cares about dead civilizations when your family is struggling now?" She wiped her eyes. But seeing this, knowing someone thought it was worth 40 years of his life to preserve it, knowing you're going to return it to Iraq, it makes me feel like maybe our history does matter, like maybe we're part of something bigger than just survival. Marcus felt his own throat tighten. This was why it mattered. This moment, this girl connecting with her heritage through an artifact thousands of years old, this was what Hartley had been working toward. Sophia approached them, put her arm around Elena's shoulders. "Your ancestors were extraordinary," she said softly. "They built the first cities, created the first written laws, made art that still moves us millennia later. And people like Marcus and Colonel Hartley, they're making sure the world never forgets that." As the students left that afternoon, chattering excitedly, making plans for projects about cultural heritage preservation, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just purpose, but connection. He'd let people into his sanctuary and the world hadn't ended. He'd shared Hartley's mission, and instead of it being diminished, it had grown, spreading to 20 new hearts. That night, Sophia stayed after the others left. They sat on the fort's wall, watching the sun set over the desert. "You did something important today," she said. "You gave those kids something to believe in. In a town that's running out of reasons to hope, you showed them that preservation matters, that history matters, that one person's dedication can change the world." "I just showed them some old stuff," Marcus said, deflecting the praise. "No, you showed them that beauty can survive destruction, that civilization endures, that even in the darkest times there are people standing guard over what matters." She looked at him. "You're becoming what Hartley was, a guardian." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm scared. Cross and his people are still out there. Brennan's probably planning something. The FBI could show up any day and seize everything. I don't know if I'm strong enough to protect this." "You're not alone anymore," Sophia said. "You have me. You have Dr. Williams and Dr. Patel. You have Rosa and the town. We're all invested now. Hartley spent 40 years alone. You don't have to." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Marcus felt the weight he'd been carrying shift slightly. Still heavy, still there, but distributed across more shoulders. He'd spent 3 years isolating himself, convinced his pain was his alone to bear. But maybe that had been the mistake all along. Maybe healing wasn't about carrying weight alone. Maybe it was about finding a burden worth sharing. And maybe, just maybe, a broken soldier and an ancient fort full of stolen treasures could become something neither had been alone, a beacon of hope for a town that had almost forgotten what hope looked like. Far off in the distance, lights from Esperanza twinkled like earthbound stars. And somewhere out in the darkness, threats were gathering. But for this moment, sitting on ancient stone walls under an endless sky, Marcus Webb felt something he hadn't felt since before the explosion. He felt like he belonged somewhere, like he mattered, like his story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The decision came to Marcus on a night when he couldn't sleep, when the weight of everything pressed too heavily to ignore. He stood on the fort's ramparts at 3 a.m, staring at stars that had witnessed empires rise and fall, and made the choice that would define the rest of his life. He was going all in, not just returning the artifacts quietly through back channels, not just honoring Hartley's mission in secret. He was going to do it publicly, properly, in a way that would matter. He was going to turn Fort Esperanza into exactly what its name promised, a place of hope. Not just for ancient treasures, but for everyone who needed proof that broken things could be made whole again. The next morning, he called a meeting. Sophia arrived first, followed by Dr. Williams and Dr. Patel. Rosa came too, representing the town, bringing coffee and breakfast burritos because she couldn't show up anywhere without feeding people. They gathered in the fort's main room, and Marcus laid out his vision. "I want to do this right," he said. "Not just ship everything back and be done with it. I want to create a proper cultural heritage center here. A place where artifacts can be temporarily housed, studied, restored if needed, and then properly repatriated through official channels. I want to work with embassies, with UNESCO, with museum directors. I want to document everything so thoroughly that there's no question about provenance or intent." "That's ambitious," Dr. Williams said carefully. "That's also expensive, time-consuming, and politically complicated." "I know. But it's the right way, and I think if we do it right, we can make this place matter beyond just Hartley's collection. We can create a model for how to handle recovered cultural property. We can provide education programs for local students. We can bring scholars here for research. We can prove that a small town in New Mexico can be part of international cultural preservation." Sophia was staring at him with an expression somewhere between pride and concern. "Marcus, that's beautiful. It's also terrifying. You're talking about building an institution from scratch." "Hartley built this collection from scratch. Took him 40 years. I figure we can build something that honors his work in less time if we're smart about it." Rosa set down her coffee cup with a definitive clink. "Count me in. This town needs something to believe in, needs something bigger than watching young people leave and businesses close. You want to bring scholars and students here? Want to put Esperanza on the map for something good? I'll help however I can." Over the next month, Marcus learned that building dreams was harder than carrying them. The bureaucracy alone was overwhelming. He needed to establish a nonprofit organization, obtain federal and state permits, navigate international cultural property laws, and somehow convince multiple countries that a veteran with no formal credentials living in a desert fort was the right person to entrust with their stolen heritage. Sophia became invaluable. She had contacts from her graduate program, professors who knew museum directors, who knew cultural attachés, who knew the right people to approach. She drafted proposals with academic precision, explaining the scope of Hartley's collection and Marcus's intention to establish a transparent repatriation process. Dr. Williams and Dr. Patel lent their reputations, writing letters of support that carried weight in archaeological circles. They brought in colleagues for consultation, slowly building a network of experts who could verify authenticity, establish provenance, and guide the complex process of cultural repatriation. But as word spread through proper channels, it also leaked through improper ones, and the threats escalated from harassment to genuine danger. The attack came on a Thursday night, 2 months after the high school students' visit. Marcus was alone in the fort, working late on documentation, when the security system alerted him to movement on multiple access points. Not just the road this time, they were coming cross-country, avoiding cameras, moving with military precision. Marcus's combat training took over. He initiated the lockdown protocol he'd developed, securing the vault, activating all alarms, sending emergency alerts to Sophia and Sheriff Braddock. Then he grabbed the shotgun he kept for emergencies and took position. 3 vehicles, 8 men, professional operators moving in tactical formation. They cut through the gate's lock with bolt cutters and spread out across the courtyard. Through the security feed, Marcus recognized the leader, Jonathan Cross, the collector who'd threatened him months ago. Marcus's phone rang. Cross, of course. "Mr. Webb, we can do this easy or hard. You've caused us considerable inconvenience. We're taking what we came for. You can either open the vault and walk away healthy, or we'll find it ourselves and you'll be collateral damage." "You're making a mistake," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady despite his hammering heart. "Every law enforcement agency in the county is on their way. This facility is under international protection now. You're not just committing burglary, You're violating diplomatic agreements." Cross laughed. "By the time anyone arrives, we'll be gone with enough inventory to make this worthwhile. Last chance, open the vault." Marcus made a decision that could have gone either way. "No!" The line went dead. Through the windows, he watched Cross give orders. 2 men approached the armory with breaching equipment. The others took positions, weapons drawn, not pointed at the buildings yet, but ready. Then, from the access road, lights appeared. Multiple vehicles, moving fast. Sheriff Braddock's cruiser in the lead, followed by 2 state police cars, and behind them, incongruously, Rosa's pickup truck and at least 6 other civilian vehicles. Cross and his team froze, caught in headlights like animals. Braddock climbed out of his cruiser with his weapon drawn, and the state police fanned out behind him. "Everyone on the ground, now!" Braddock shouted. "You're trespassing on protected property." Marcus watched through the window as Cross's team calculated odds and apparently decided 8 against a dozen law enforcement and armed civilians wasn't worth it. They surrendered, hands raised, as more vehicles arrived. Sophia's car, followed by what looked like half the town of Esperanza. When Marcus emerged from the fort, he found a scene that reminded him more of a community gathering than an arrest. Rosa was there with thermoses of coffee. Victor, the retired teacher, was armed with an ancient hunting rifle. Elena and several other students stood by their parents' trucks, phones out, filming everything. Sophia ran to Marcus, checking him over with worried hands. "Are you okay?" "When the alarm went out, everyone just mobilized. Rosa started calling people, and within minutes, half the town was headed this way." Marcus looked around at the faces lit by headlights and dawn light. People who'd dropped everything to come protect a fort and a mission they'd only recently learned about. Neighbors who'd decided that what was happening here mattered enough to risk their own safety. "Why?" Marcus asked Rosa. "Why would you all come?" Rosa fixed him with a look that was pure, stubborn determination. "Because you're one of ours now. Because what you're doing here matters. Because this town is so tired of losing things. Jobs, young people, hope. We're not losing you too. We're not letting anyone take what you're trying to build." Sheriff Braddock finished loading Cross and his team into police vehicles. He approached Marcus, shaking his head. "You're damn lucky they showed up when they did. These men were armed. This could have gone bad fast." "I know. Thank you for coming." "Thank Rosa. She's the one who mobilized the cavalry." Braddock paused. "Look, Webb, I'm going to need you to come down to the station tomorrow, give a full statement, but, off the record, what you're doing here, returning that heritage, building something that puts Esperanza on the map for good reasons, keep doing it. This town needs it. Hell, maybe the world needs it." As the sun rose fully, casting golden light across the fort's ancient stones, Marcus stood surrounded by people who'd become more than neighbors. They'd become allies, believers, guardians of a mission that had expanded beyond Hartley's original vision. The attempted theft became a catalyst. Media attention brought scrutiny, but it also brought support. The story of a veteran protecting cultural treasures with the help of a dying town captured imaginations. Donations started arriving, small amounts from individuals moved by the story, larger grants from foundations focused on cultural preservation. The momentum built quickly. Within 3 months, Marcus had established the Hartley Cultural Heritage Center as a registered nonprofit with a board of directors that included Sophia, Dr. Williams, Dr. Patel, Rosa, and 2 museum directors who'd been moved by the mission. Angela flew out to serve as financial director, finally getting her brother back by joining his cause. The fort transformed. The old barracks became climate-controlled storage for artifacts in transit. The dining hall converted into a conservation laboratory. The commander's quarters became an educational center where scholars could conduct research and students could participate in programs. But the real work was the repatriation process itself. The first artifacts to return home went to Iraq. Marcus worked with the Iraqi embassy in Washington to arrange proper documentation and transfer. Dr. Williams authenticated a collection of Sumerian artifacts, including cylinder seals and pottery, that had been looted from the National Museum of Iraq during the chaos of 2003. The day they were packed for shipment, Marcus stood in the laboratory watching conservators carefully wrap each piece. Sophia came to stand beside him. "You're doing it," she said quietly. "You're actually finishing what Hartley started." "We're doing it," Marcus corrected. "I couldn't do any of this alone." 6 weeks later, Marcus received photos from Baghdad. The artifacts had arrived safely and been installed in a special exhibition called Treasures Coming Home. The images showed Iraqi families standing in front of the display, some crying, some taking photos, all clearly moved by seeing pieces of their heritage returned. One photo in particular stopped Marcus cold. An elderly Iraqi man stood before a cylinder seal, his hand pressed against the display case, tears streaming down his weathered face. The accompanying note explained. This man's father was a curator at the National Museum before the war. He watched it being looted and died believing these treasures were lost forever. Seeing them return gave him closure he thought impossible. "Thank you for giving us back a piece of our father's legacy." Marcus sat at his desk, that photograph in his hands, and understood something profound. This wasn't just about returning objects. It was about healing wounds that went deeper than any inventory could measure. Every artifact that went home carried with it a message. Your history matters. Your culture matters. You matter. The work continued, accelerated. Artifacts returned to Syria, to Afghanistan, to Egypt. Each repatriation followed the same careful process: authentication, documentation, diplomatic coordination, proper shipping. And with each successful return, the Hartley Center's reputation grew. International organizations took notice. UNESCO designated the center as an official partner in cultural property recovery. Museums began sending items they'd acquired suspiciously, asking for help verifying provenance and arranging repatriation. The center became exactly what Marcus had envisioned, a model for how to handle recovered cultural heritage with integrity and respect. But Marcus didn't forget the local mission either. The town of Esperanza was as much a part of this as the international work. He established a scholarship program funded by a portion of the donations the center received for students interested in archaeology, museum studies, or cultural preservation. Elena was the first recipient, earning funding for college with the requirement that she return summers to intern at the center. He partnered with Sophia's school to create a cultural heritage curriculum that brought students to the fort regularly. They didn't just learn about ancient civilizations, they participated in actual conservation work, documented artifacts, corresponded with museums abroad, became junior ambassadors for the mission. The economic impact on Esperanza was visible within the first year. Scholars visiting the center needed places to stay, so 2 abandoned buildings on Main Street were renovated into a small hotel. They needed places to eat, so Rosa expanded her diner and hired 3 new staff members. The general store started carrying archaeological supplies and reference books. The gas station added an espresso machine for visitors accustomed to more cosmopolitan amenities. Young people who'd left started coming back, seeing opportunity where there had been only decline. Victor, the retired teacher, reopened the old library as a cultural center where visitors could learn about the region's own history. Native American, Spanish colonial, mining era. Esperanza began connecting its own heritage to the international mission happening at the fort. But the most profound change was internal, invisible to cameras and articles. It was the change in Marcus himself. A year after finding the vault, Marcus stood in what had become the center's main exhibition hall, watching a group of Afghan students who'd traveled from Kabul to see artifacts about to be returned to their country. They moved through the displays with reverence, one young woman standing for long minutes before a Buddhist statue recovered from the Bamiyan region. "This was near my grandmother's village," she said to Marcus, her English heavily accented but clear. "The Taliban destroyed the giant Buddhas there. I thought everything was gone, but this survived. Someone protected it." "Colonel Hartley protected it," Marcus said, "and now it's going home." The young woman looked at him with eyes that reflected too much experience for someone so young. "You're a veteran, yes?" "Rosa told me. American soldier." Marcus nodded, uncertain where this was going. "My father was killed by Taliban. I have reason to hate Americans, to hate soldiers. But you're sending back pieces of our culture that your country's war helped destroy. You're choosing to heal instead of harm." She smiled through tears. "Thank you for showing me that soldiers can be builders too." After she left, Marcus sat alone in the exhibition hall as the sun set outside, painting the walls in shades of amber and gold. He thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. Broken, isolated, convinced his purpose had died on a road in Afghanistan. He thought about the desperate bid on an abandoned fort, the accidental discovery of a hidden vault, the choice to honor a dead man's mission instead of profiting from it. Every decision had led him here, to this moment, this place, this purpose. His legs still ached. The nightmares hadn't completely stopped. He still had days when the weight of everything felt crushing, but now he had something stronger than pain. He had meaning. He had a mission that mattered. He had people depending on him, not as a soldier but as a guardian of something precious. Sophia found him there as darkness fell. She'd been working in the conservation lab, finishing documentation on a collection of Persian manuscripts bound for Tehran. "Deep thoughts?" she asked, sitting beside him on the bench. "Just realizing I came here to disappear, and instead I became more visible than I've ever been." "Is that bad?" Marcus considered. "No, it's terrifying sometimes, but it's not bad. I spent 3 years trying to hide from the world because I thought I had nothing left to offer. Turns out I was wrong. I just needed to find what I was supposed to be guarding." Sophia took his hand. "Hartley would be proud, not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become doing it." 2 years after opening, the Hartley Cultural Heritage Center hosted its first major conference on ethical repatriation practices. Scholars from 30 countries gathered at Fort Esperanza to discuss frameworks for returning cultural property displaced by conflict, colonialism, and theft. Marcus gave the opening address, standing before hundreds of people in a large tent erected in the fort's courtyard. He was still uncomfortable with public speaking, still fought the urge to deflect attention. But this wasn't about him anymore. It was about the mission. "Colonel Hartley spent 40 years working alone," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "He thought he had to be a lone guardian, protecting these treasures in secret until the world was ready to receive them back. But his real legacy isn't the 300 artifacts he saved. It's the network of guardians he inspired." He gestured to the crowd. "Everyone here, we're part of that network now. Every museum professional who verifies provenance instead of looking away. Every archaeologist who prioritizes preservation over publication. Every government official who chooses repatriation over revenue. Every citizen who believes cultural heritage belongs to humanity, not just to whoever can afford to buy it." Hartley showed me something I desperately needed to learn. That broken people can build beautiful things. That healing isn't about erasing wounds, but about finding purpose that makes the wounds meaningful. Every artifact we return home, we're not just giving back objects. We're affirming that beauty can survive destruction, that civilization endures, that there are still people willing to stand guard over what matters. The applause when he finished surprised him with its intensity. People stood, the ovation lasting longer than his actual speech. But more meaningful were the conversations afterward. Scholars sharing their own repatriation projects, officials offering partnerships, students expressing interest in dedicating their careers to cultural preservation. The mission was spreading. Hartley's lone crusade had become a movement. By the third year, Esperanza had been transformed. The town's population had grown to 450, reversing decades of decline. Property values had risen. The school had added advanced placement classes in archaeology and cultural studies. 2 new businesses had opened on Main Street, a bookstore specializing in cultural heritage and a cafe called The Curator that served coffee and featured rotating exhibitions of local art. Rosa's Diner had become a gathering place for an international community of scholars, students, conservators, and curious visitors. She'd added Middle Eastern dishes to the menu, learned to make proper Turkish coffee, and appointed herself unofficial ambassador to confused tourists looking for the famous fort. Victor had written a book about Esperanza's own history, connecting the town's mining heritage to larger patterns of American Western expansion and cultural change. It became required reading in Sophia's classes and sold well enough that he was planning a second volume. Elena had completed her freshman year at Berkeley, studying archaeology, and had spent the summer working at the center. She'd become Marcus's unofficial ambassador to young people, giving tours, running educational programs, explaining to visitors that the fort wasn't just about the past. It was about the future being built by people who cared. But the most significant change was personal. Marcus had stopped thinking of himself as a broken soldier and started understanding himself as something else, a bridge between past and present, destruction and preservation, isolation and community. One evening in late summer, as the center prepared to send a final collection of artifacts to Syria, Marcus walked the fort's walls at sunset. The same walk he'd taken hundreds of times before, but everything was different now. Below him the courtyard bustled with activity, conservators carefully crating pottery, Sophia reviewing documentation with Dr. Patel, Angela on her laptop managing finances that had grown from his meager savings to a multi-million-dollar nonprofit budget. Students from the summer program laughing as they helped Rosa set up for a celebration dinner. 3 years ago, this place had been silent, empty, waiting. Now it was alive. Marcus's phone rang. He answered to find an unknown number with an Iraqi country code. "Mr. Webb," a woman's voice said. "My name is Dr. Layla Al-Hamdi. I'm the director of the Baghdad Museum. I wanted to call personally to thank you. The artifacts you returned, they've been installed in our main hall. We held a ceremony yesterday. Over 1,000 people came. They wept, Mr. Webb. They wept because someone remembered, because someone cared enough to send their heritage home." Marcus felt his throat tighten. It was always meant to come home. Colonel Hartley made sure of that. "Yes, but you honored his mission when you could have profited from it. That choice matters. We're planning a special exhibition next year documenting the journey these pieces took, from looting to recovery to return. We'd like you to come, to see what your work has meant to our people." After the call ended, Marcus stood watching the sun paint the desert in shades of fire. He thought about Hartley, about the old colonel who died before seeing his mission completed. He hoped somehow Hartley knew that his 40 years of lonely guardianship had mattered, that someone had found what he'd hidden and chosen honor over profit, that his fort had become exactly what its name promised, a place of hope. Sophia appeared beside him, as she often did during these sunset moments. They'd grown close over the years, their partnership evolving into something neither of them had planned but both treasured. "Big thoughts again?" she asked. "Just thinking about how none of this was the plan. I bought this place to hide, to be alone with my pain. Instead, I found a purpose that won't let me hide. Is that bad?" Marcus smiled. 3 years ago, I would have said yes. Now? He gestured to the bustling courtyard below, to the fort that had become a beacon, to the mission that had saved him as much as he'd saved it. "Now I think maybe being forced out of hiding was exactly what I needed." The celebration that night was unlike anything Fort Esperanza had ever seen. Long tables in the courtyard, laden with food from a dozen different cultures. Rosa's Mexican dishes alongside Iraqi dolma, Syrian kibbeh, Persian fesinjan, American barbecue. Music played, a mix that somehow worked. Traditional Middle Eastern instruments blending with country guitar, creating something new from old elements. People came from across the region, the students whose lives had been changed by the center's educational programs, scholars who'd contributed expertise, townspeople who'd watched their dying community revive. Veterans Marcus had connected with, men and women who'd found in the center's mission a way to channel their own pain into something constructive. Angela stood and clinked her glass, calling for attention. 3 years ago, my brother called me from a fort in the middle of nowhere. He'd found something he didn't understand and didn't know what to do with. I thought he'd finally lost it. She smiled at Marcus. Turns out he'd found exactly what he needed. Not treasure, though there was certainly that, but purpose. The thing every veteran struggles to find when the uniform comes off. She raised her glass. To Marcus, who chose honor when profit would have been easier. To Colonel Hartley, whose mission inspired all of this. And to everyone here who believes some things are worth protecting, even when the world makes that protection difficult. As people drank and cheered, Elena stood, emboldened by youth and genuine feeling. Mr. Webb, you probably don't remember this, but when I first met you, I asked if you'd ever let us see the artifacts. You said maybe. That maybe became my whole life changing. This center, the scholarship that's letting me study archaeology, the understanding that my Iraqi heritage is something to be proud of. It all started because you said maybe instead of no. She looked around at the crowd. This fort was built in 1876 to protect settlers from attack. Now it protects something more important: memory, heritage, proof that human creativity matters more than human destruction. That's what Mr. Webb and Colonel Hartley understood. That's what all of us are part of now. Marcus stood, uncomfortable with attention but understanding the moment required acknowledgement. I've given a lot of speeches over the past few years. Tried to explain what we're doing here, why it matters. But the truth is simpler than all those words. 3 years ago, I was drowning. I didn't want to die exactly, but I didn't know how to live. This fort, these artifacts, this mission, they threw me a lifeline. They gave me something bigger than my pain to focus on. He looked around at faces lit by lanterns and firelight. But I couldn't have done any of this alone. Sophia, you turned my desperate fumbling into actual scholarship. Dr. Williams and Dr. Patel, you lent credibility when I had none. Rosa, you adopted me into this community before I'd earned it. Angela, you left your whole life to help build this. The town of Esperanza, you protected this place when dangerous people came calling. And Colonel Hartley, wherever you are, thank you for trusting that the right person would find your work and choose to honor it. His voice cracked slightly. You've all taught me that healing isn't about going back to who you were before the trauma. It's about becoming someone new, someone shaped by the trauma but not defined by it. I'm not the soldier who got injured in Afghanistan anymore. I'm not even just the guy who bought a fort for cheap. I'm a guardian. We all are. And that's a purpose worth any amount of pain. Later, as the party continued and the stars emerged in their thousands, Marcus found himself alone with Sophia on the fort's wall. Below them, music and laughter drifted up like prayers. What's next? Sophia asked. We've returned almost everything from Hartley's collection. The center's established, thriving. You've accomplished what you set out to do. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Hartley's collection was the beginning, not the end. There are thousands of artifacts still out there, lost or stolen, waiting for someone to care enough to send them home. Museums are reaching out, asking for help with their own repatriation efforts. Governments are changing laws about cultural property. We've proven a model works. Now we expand it. So you're staying? Making this your life's work? Marcus looked at the fort, at the walls that had sheltered him, at the courtyard where a community had gathered to celebrate something good. I spent 3 years trying to figure out how to survive. Now I'm focused on how to live. This work, this mission, it's shown me the difference. Yeah, I'm staying. This is home now. Sophia smiled and took his hand. Good, because I'm not going anywhere either. As months turned into years, Fort Esperanza's reputation grew exponentially. The center expanded, renovating more buildings, hiring permanent staff, establishing formal partnerships with universities and museums worldwide. Marcus found himself traveling occasionally, to Baghdad, to Damascus, to Kabul, attending ceremonies where artifacts were formally returned, seeing firsthand the impact of the work. Each trip reinforced his conviction. In Baghdad, he watched Iraqi children tour an exhibition of returned artifacts, their faces glowing with pride. In Damascus, despite the ongoing conflict, museum officials wept as they unpacked pottery from ancient Palmyra. In Kabul, an elderly man showed him photographs of how the artifacts would be displayed, his hands trembling with emotion. But Marcus always returned to the fort. That was where the real work happened. That was home. 5 years after buying the property for $12,500, Marcus stood in a completely transformed Fort Esperanza. What had been abandoned was now vital. What had been forgotten was now famous. What had been a hiding place had become a beacon. The center had facilitated the return of over 800 artifacts to their countries of origin. It had trained 200 students in cultural heritage preservation. It had published research papers, influenced international policy, and become the model other institutions studied when establishing their own repatriation programs. But more importantly to Marcus, it had saved a town. Esperanza was thriving now, its population pushing 600, its economy diversified, its future secure. Young people were staying or returning, seeing opportunity where there had been only decline. The center employed 40 local residents directly and supported dozens more through tourism and scholarship. On the 5th anniversary of the center's founding, they held a ceremony. Dignitaries came from Washington, from the United Nations, from embassies across the Middle East. But the people Marcus cared most about seeing were there too. Rosa, who'd believed in him from the beginning. Victor, whose History of the Town had become a bestseller. Elena, now completing her master's degree and slated to return as the center's education director. Sheriff Braddock, who'd stood with him when danger came calling. And standing beside him as he accepted a humanitarian award from UNESCO was Sophia, whose partnership had evolved into love, whose belief in the mission matched his own, whose presence reminded him daily that healing was possible. As Marcus stood before the crowd, accepting recognition he'd never sought, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. The explosion in Afghanistan that shattered his leg and his sense of purpose. The 3 years of drift and numbness and quiet desperation. The desperate bid on an abandoned fort, the discovery that changed everything. 5 years ago, Marcus said into the microphone, I thought I was buying a place to disappear. Instead, I found a mission that won't let me hide. Colonel Hartley spent 40 years as a lone guardian, protecting cultural treasures from destruction. He died before he could finish his work. But he left behind more than artifacts. He left behind an example, proof that one person, acting with integrity and dedication, can make a difference that echoes across decades and borders. He paused, looking out at faces he'd come to know and love. But the real lesson I've learned isn't about artifacts or repatriation or cultural policy. It's about purpose. Every person here, everyone who's been part of this mission, you've taught me that healing isn't about erasing wounds. It's about finding work that makes the wounds meaningful. It's about channeling pain into protection, isolation into community, brokenness into building. I was a broken soldier when I came here. Maybe I still am. But now I'm also a guardian, a builder, part of something bigger than myself. And that transformation, that journey from hiding to standing guard, that's the real treasure I found beneath Fort Esperanza. As applause filled the courtyard, as people stood in recognition of 5 years of work that had changed lives across continents, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since before the explosion. Not the absence of pain, but something stronger. Peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing your life matters, your work has purpose, your wounds are building something instead of just bleeding. That night, after the ceremony ended and guests departed, Marcus walked the fort's walls one final time. The routine had become meditation, a way of connecting with the place that had saved him, with Hartley's ghost, with the mission they shared across death's boundary. Sophia found him there, as she always did. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I spent 3 years wishing I'd died in that explosion, wishing I hadn't survived when others didn't. And now I'm grateful, not for the pain, not for the trauma, but grateful that I lived long enough to find this, to become this. A guardian." "Yeah, a guardian." Marcus smiled. Hartley left a note in the vault, said he hoped the right person would find his work. "I used to wonder if I was the right person. Now I know it doesn't matter. What matters is I chose to be the right person. I chose honor over profit, mission over comfort, building over hiding. And that choice made all the difference. That choice made everything." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had witnessed Hartley's lonely vigil, that now watched over a community dedicated to his mission. Below them, the fort glowed softly, lights in windows where scholars worked late, where students studied, where artifacts waited for their journey home. Fort Esperanza had become exactly what its name promised. Not just a place, but a living symbol of hope, proof that broken things could be mended, that beauty could survive destruction, that one person's dedication could inspire a movement that changed the world. And Marcus Webb, decorated veteran, injured soldier, guardian of heritage, had become proof of something equally important. That healing wasn't about going back to who you were before the trauma. It was about becoming someone new, someone shaped by pain, but not defined by it, someone who chose to protect instead of hide, to build instead of break, to stand guard over what mattered even when standing was hard. As dawn approached, painting the desert in shades of gold and promise, Marcus descended from the walls and walked through the fort's courtyard. He passed the conservation lab where Dr. Patel was already at work. He passed the education center where Elena was preparing materials for a class of visiting students. He passed Rosa setting up breakfast in what had become the center's cafe, humming as she worked. He ended his walk at Hartley's study, preserved as the colonel had left it, now serving as both memorial and inspiration. The photographs still hung on the walls, the journals still filled the shelves, but now there was something new, a bronze plaque beside the door. Colonel James Hartley, 1945 to 2018. Guardian of Heritage. His 40 years of solitary dedication became the foundation for a movement. His belief that cultural treasures deserve protection inspired a community, a center, and a mission that continues. Some heroes wear uniforms, some wield weapons, some simply stand guard over beauty in a world that tries to destroy it. Colonel Hartley did all three. This center exists because he believed someone would care enough to finish what he started. We are that someone. We are all guardians now. Marcus stood before the plaque, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of purpose intermingling. He wasn't alone anymore. The mission Hartley had carried solo for 4 decades was now shared by hundreds, maybe thousands of people who believed cultural heritage mattered, who understood that protecting the past was essential to building the future. His phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Alhamdi in Baghdad. Final shipment arrived safely. Exhibition opens next week. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for sending our heritage home. You and Colonel Hartley have given us back pieces of ourselves we thought lost forever. Marcus smiled, typed a reply, and then stood in the growing light, feeling more whole than he had in years. The scars were still there. The limp, the nightmares, the moments when helicopters overhead sent him back to Afghanistan. But now those scars were part of a larger story. A story about survival, yes, but more importantly, about choosing to build something beautiful from the broken pieces. Anyone can find treasure if they're lucky. But it takes courage to protect it when profit beckons. It takes integrity to honor someone else's mission when your own life feels purposeless. It takes faith to believe that beauty matters enough to guard it against those who see only dollar signs. Marcus Webb had found all three: courage, integrity, faith, buried beneath an abandoned fort in the New Mexico desert. And in finding them, he'd found himself. The broken soldier had become a guardian, the isolated fort had become a beacon, the dying town had found new life. And Fort Esperanza, built in 1876 to protect settlers from danger, now protected something far more precious: memory, heritage, proof that human civilization matters, that culture endures, that there will always be guardians standing watch over what makes us human. As the sun rose fully, flooding the courtyard with light, Marcus turned from Hartley's study and walked toward the sound of voices gathering for another day's work. Another day of documentation and preservation. Another day of teaching and learning. Another day of sending treasures home. He'd come here to disappear. Instead, he'd been found. And in being found, he'd discovered that the greatest treasure wasn't what lay hidden in vaults beneath stone floors. The greatest treasure was what he'd become in the process of protecting it, whole again, purposeful again, proof that healing was possible if you found work that mattered more than the wounds. The fort's iron gate stood open, welcoming scholars and students and visitors from around the world. Above it, someone had hung a banner reading, "Fort Esperanza Cultural Heritage Center, Guardians of Memory, Builders of Hope." Marcus Webb, guardian, stood beneath that banner and knew with absolute certainty that he'd found where he belonged. Not hiding from the world, but standing at its center, protecting beauty, preserving memory, proving that even the most broken among us can build something extraordinary if we choose honor over ease, mission over comfort, guardianship over gain. The fort had given him shelter when he needed it. The mission had given him purpose when he'd lost it. And in giving everything away, every artifact, every treasure, every piece of Colonel Hartley's 40-year collection, Marcus had gained everything that mattered. He was no longer lost. He was no longer broken. He was home. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories of transformation and redemption. Click to continue this journey with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what we find, but who we become protecting it.